Good afternoon. I do hope everyone is doing well today. For this week, we were to look at the Project Muse database. And in this particular database, I did find several sources that may prove beneficial to my topic of strategic bombing. The three books that I picked for this week's discussion do have different views and do look at strategic bombing from different aspects. The first book by Tammy Davis Biddle, Rhetoric and Reality in Air Warfare, The Evolution of British and American Ideas about Strategic Bombing. Biddle is a postmodernist revision historian. She takes a very dim view of strategic bombing and does argue that strategic bombing was a failure. In this book, she argues that the bombing was a failure almost from its inception, that the man who created the doctrine did not understand modern industrial societies, that they did not understand, modern industries' adaptability or civilian resiliency. And that during the course of the war, that the leadership was so dogmatic, so stuck on strategic bombing, that they, refused to really modify or adapt during the course of the war. And then when they reluctantly do so, that modification was more into move away from precision bombing to the area bombing of civilians and targeting, industrial workers. So her argument is that strategic bombing was a failure. The second book by Mark Claude Helter, Beneficial Bombing, The Progressive Foundation of American Air Power. This is a book that I was not familiar with and I found very interesting. And what is argued here is that the author argues that the men who created the strategic bombing were very reform-minded men, that they were influenced by the progressive era and the reform-mindedness of that era, but they also were influenced by the horrors of World War I. And that as they were creating a doctrine, looking toward the next war, they were trying to reform warfare. That they were hoping to create something that would shorten the next war and thus, of course, reduce the number of casualties. And they thought that strategic bombing may very well be the answer. And so the strategic bombing was created for the purposes of shortening World War II with as few casualties as possible. Claude Felter argues that in reality, strategic bombing, though may not have been as successful as the man had wanted, that the leadership had wanted, but still had its influence, it still had its impact, and did indeed help shorten World War II. And he even argues that those progressive ideas did emerge intact after the war and became the foundation of modern U.S. Air Force doctrine. The third book by Robert Ehlers, Targeting the Third Reich, Air Intelligence and Allied Bombing. There's not very much written about the air intelligence part of World War II. And so this is a very helpful and beneficial book in understanding why certain targets were picked, why certain targets were bombed many times, and so on. Because the purpose of the intelligence is one to help find the vulnerable industries of Germany's war-making abilities. And they would help, in selection of targets. Of course, their job also was to assess the defenses around targets and help find the best routes in and out of a target area, but also to assess the damage after the bombing and to, evaluate whether or not, subsequent missions needed to be flown at a particular target. So this is an aspect of World War II that's still not, written a great deal about, but was still very beneficial and helpful in the effectiveness of strategic bombing during the war. Anyway, thank you very much. And again, I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Goodbye.